Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2021 Ford F-250, we're going to be showing you how to install the Timbren Rear Suspension Enhancement. But before we do that, why don't we check them out and make sure that this is going to be something that'll work for you. So before we put our suspension enhancement on, what we like to do is take a couple measurements and run through our test course and things like that. That way we can have a really good comparison on, you know, how these suspension enhancements are actually going to improve our truck. So first things first, we have our truck empty, no weight, factory suspension, and I'm going to take a measurement. That way it'll give us a baseline on where our truck is sitting. So here at the back, we go from the ground to the very edge of our wheel well. That's going to be right at 43 inches. And here at the front of the truck, we'll take that same measurement from the ground to the bottom edge. It's going to be right at 39.5 inches. So what we'll do now is put some weight in the bed of the truck and see how it affects it. So I went ahead and got some weight in the bed of the truck, and as soon as I put it in there, I can notice that it started to squat. So I'm curious to see how much. We'll take that same measurement here at the back from the ground to that bottom edge there. That's going to be right at 40.5 inches. And here at the front of our truck, take that same measurement, and we're going to be right at 40 inches. So what's happening, back of the truck squatted down, front of the truck came up a little bit. And you know, it's not by a ton, but keep in mind too, this is a little bit less than 200 gallons of water that we put in there. So for this truck, that's really not a ton of weight. It can handle a lot more. So think about if you had triple or quadruple the amount of weight like that, everything would be amplified and even worse. And what's going to happen is with the truck riding like that, probably the biggest thing is going to be you know, how it's going to drive down the road. So you're going to lose some of that suspension travel. Everything's going to be a lot rougher. And also, you know, you're working your suspension harder than it needs to be, really. You know what I mean? If there's a suspension enhancement that you can do to take some of the load off that and kind of help it out, it just makes sense to do, honestly. And even with, you know, the front of the truck being raised up a little bit, that's going to affect your steering performance because now your suspension geometry is different than what it should be. You know, tire wear, braking and steering and just about everything around, you know, on the whole board is going to be affected. So, you know, doing a suspension enhancement hopefully will solve those issues or at least help them. But with that said, you know, measurements and stuff like that's one thing. You know, how it's actually going to feel whenever you're driving it down the road, that's what matters, right? And that's a whole different ball game as far as that's concerned. So why don't we go ahead, hop in the truck, we'll run it through our test course and see how it does. First thing that we're gonna do is go over some bumps, and we'll see how it feels. So I like to get going over a few of them and really just try to get some weight transferring in our truck. And honestly, it's not terrible. I'm not gonna lie by any means. These trucks are so heavy duty now. Over these bumps, you know, it's not bad. I could definitely feel, you know, the travel and the suspension has been affected. So I definitely think there's some room for improvement there. And just kind of how long it takes our truck to kind of restabilize. So we hit these bumps and, you know, it kind of shakes for 2 or 3 bounces. And so I think it could be improved there as well. And keep in mind, with the amount of weight in the bed of the truck, I mean, that's probably, you know, this thing can handle a lot more than that. So if I feel some effects with just this much weight, I can imagine, you know, everything is going to be even worse. You know, you're going to feel these effects even more so if we're really loaded down, if we're pulling a big camper or got a huge load that we're pulling behind us. So over the bumps, not too bad, but like I said, I think there's definitely some room for improvement there. So now what we'll do is some evasive maneuvering, kind of do some slalom moves there. And honestly, I feel like this is a more real-world test. You know, how often are you going to be hitting a bunch of bumps? And this is usually where, from my past experience, you know, this is usually kind of pretty bad. So what I'm going to do is pick up some speed and start kind of turning like this. And yep, just like I thought, almost immediately, this is where you can really feel that weight. You know, we're getting a lot of body roll. That truck's leaning hard, and it kind of takes you, you know, an extra couple of turns on the steering wheel to get you pointed where you want to go, and things like that. So, you know, as far as our evasive maneuvering, I feel like this is where the best or biggest improvement were to be had. Really trying to keep the truck more planted, and you know, especially with their steering, it'd be nice if it was more responsive. So really curious to see if this upgrade is going to correct that. So now with our suspension enhancement installed, I put that same amount of weight in the bed of the truck, and right away I can tell visually it's a little bit better for sure, not squatting nearly as much. So we'll take the measurement back here, and from the ground to that edge, it's going to be right at about 42 inches. And here at the front of the truck, same measurement. That is right at 39 3/4 of an inch. So definitely an improvement as far as how our truck is squatting. The front end isn't up nearly as high, and the back isn't squatting down nearly as much. So just from that standpoint, we should see a difference, right? But the real test is running through the course and seeing how it feels. So let's hop in the truck and do that now. So here inside the truck, we're gonna run through what we did earlier and see what happens. So we'll approach our bumps, and just like before, I like to really get some movement going through our chassis to you know, really see how it feels. And as we hit these first few bumps, definitely better. It almost feels like it's, I don't know how I can explain this. It almost feels like a cushion almost in between our suspension. So it isn't as violent, I guess you could say. Like you feel it, it's just a lot softer whenever we're hitting these bumps, and the truck is actually coming back a lot faster. So like we talked about before, you know, that weight would transfer and kind of float us around, and it's probably twice as good as what it was. So definitely an improvement there over the bumps. And again, you know, not a ton of weight back there. So if it's helping with this little bit of weight, probably really going to help a lot more with a really substantial amount of weight. So now we'll run through our slalom again, and this is where I'm really curious to see if it's better. So I'm picking up some speed, and yeah, immediately I can tell a difference. And I'm not even getting too crazy here. I'm gonna really try to get a little more aggressive here. A lot better. I'll probably say at least twice as good. Not nearly as much body roll. The truck feels like it's, you know, just stuck to the ground a lot better. So the steering especially, that's where I notice a big difference, is your steering, you know, you don't have to constantly try to like overcorrect. It just, you turn the wheel a lot more responsive, and, you know, the truck feels like it's gonna go where you point it. So, you know, definitely an improvement there, and that kind of seems to be the trend. I've done a lot of different types of suspension enhancements on trucks, motorhomes, just about everything, you name it. And this really seems to be where a lot of suspension enhancements shine, is doing those corners and turns and things like that. And to me, that makes the most sense, because I feel like that's the most realistic driving. That's when you're really going to feel it. So definitely did a good job there. So now that we are done with the test course, let's take a look at the Timberings. So this is what they're going to look like installed underneath your truck. And super simple design. Essentially, they're just going to replace your factory John's bumper. So I mean, you can see a huge difference here. Essentially, these John's bumpers, all they're going to do is stop your truck from bottoming out while the Timberings are actually going to provide some support. So they're going to fill that gap, and whenever you're loaded down, these are going to make contact here and provide us with that cushion and that extra support. With that said, so you can see we don't have any weight or anything in the truck. We are a decent distance away from making contact. So one of the cool things is the fact that, you know, these aren't going to affect the way your truck rides under normal conditions. And that's not always the case with some suspension enhancements, like an airbag, for example. They're pretty much always making contact, and they kind of, you know, they make your truck really stiff, kind of a firm ride, even more so than what it already is. These newer trucks are pretty stout. So with that said, I do want to mention this is about as big of a gap as you want. And this is factory suspension. So for those of you that have a lift kit or anything like that, take a look into getting the additional pucks, and that'll fill that void and make it more usable and more user friendly. With that said, just to kind of compare these to some of the other enhancements, let's just say an airbag, for example. That's really popular. These are going to have some advantages and disadvantages. So one of the advantages is the fact that it is maintenance free. All right, once you have them installed, you're done. You don't have to worry about them. Another advantage would be what we just talked about a moment ago, the ride quality whenever you're not hauling a load. One of the advantages that an airbag has, though, is the fact that it is completely adjustable. So if you haul around a lot of different trailers and your load is constantly kind of changing, that would be a good option for you, because then you could adjust the pressure in the bag and kind of fine tune it. With that said too, you know, an airbag, you have to maintain them, you have to keep minimum pressure in them. And it just seems like, I'm not going to lie, over time, eventually you develop leaks. There's really no other way around it, you know, it just kind of happens. And so you might have to address those issues further down the line. With a Timbren like that, something you're not going to have to worry about, you know, it's just kind of the way it is. These two are, I guess you could kind of say they're adjustable, not adjustable in a sense that we can change them, but depending on the weight of your load, they're kind of progressive. So let's say if you have a somewhat heavy load in here, truck squats down enough to make contact, then you know, it's going to provide the support it needs. On the other hand, let's say if you have a super heavy load, these are going to get more firm essentially and provide us with more stability and support. So they're kind of self-adjusting in a sense, which is pretty cool. So these are going to have an 8,000 pound load carrying capacity. Keep in mind though, this isn't going to increase your truck's load carrying capacities. You know, that's just how much weight these are capable of handling. With that said too, we get a handful of questions about people using in-bed campers. So like the campers that stay in the bed of your truck. These will work with that and definitely help. To me, it seems like I would want something almost a little bit softer personally. So like a sumo spring, for example, those kind of fill the void consistently. And I feel like, just from my experience, they're a little more forgiving, almost more, they're there to provide support, but I feel like they're just more forgiving. You know, they're kind of more of a cushion type feel. So that might help absorb some of the road shock and stuff better and keep the things inside of your camper from getting tossed all over the place and everything like that. But, you know, other than that, at the end of the day, really simple but effective product, and that's one of the things I like about it. You know, it just works flat out. So, you know, it should work good for you too in your particular situation. But other than that, as far as the installation goes, it's about as easy as it gets. Literally, you just pull the old jounce bumper off and more or less just bolt this one up. So really shouldn't give you any issues at all or take up a bunch of your time. But if you need to follow along, feel free to. We'll go ahead and get this installed now. To begin our installation, we're going to be underneath the back of our truck, and what I've done is just temporarily removed our spare tire. Just gives us a lot more room to work. And I'm also going to remove our heat shield too for now. It just opens everything up and makes it a lot easier. So to get this off, you're going to have 3 nuts. One will be here. That's a 13 millimeter head nut. And then you'll have 2 kind of along this edge, so just right up here. So go ahead, grab our socket and get this removed. So we'll go ahead and get this out of the way for now. It will be getting reinstalled, so just a heads up. So what we need to do now, right above our rear axle tube, if you look here, this is our jounce bumper. We need to remove it, so it's going to be held in place with 2 nuts, and we'll grab a 15 millimeter socket and get them removed. We'll go ahead and get this out of the way, and then repeat this same process over on the other side of our truck. So now what we can do is assemble our enhancement system. So you're going to take the brackets, and what I suggest doing is making sure the threads are clean, so you can take your bolt and the flat washer, just make sure that threads in easily. Sometimes, or a lot of times, there's paint in the threads and makes it kind of tricky, so you can do it now. Take a hand wrench and make sure you run it through there. If it's super dirty, you may need to use something like this. This is called a tap, and essentially it recuts the threads. Essentially, it makes them like new again. So if that's the case, probably use that. This is a 10 millimeter by 1.5 thread pitch, so that's what you'll need. But with these cleaned out, what you're going to do is take this spring and this puck. You're going to take your bolt and the flat washer and get it through there. Like that. Then you can take the puck, put that on, and that's going to thread into the bracket. So I like to make sure they're started by hand, like that, and then we can come back with the 17 millimeter and tighten it down. So you just do the same thing to assemble the other one. So now back underneath the vehicle, we can take our assembly here, and this is just going to go over those factory studs. You take the factory nuts and get them started, and then I'm going to tighten these down, not all the way though, almost all the way. That's because we're going to have to put a shim in there, so you take your shim, slide that in place like that, and then we can come back and tighten them. We put a shim on each side. I'll go ahead and give these a couple more turns to make sure they're completely tight. So once you have one side done, you're just going to do the same thing over on the other side to get that one installed. So once you have both the Timberings installed, you're simply just going to reinstall your heat shield and put your spare tire back up in place. And that's really all there is to it, so extremely straightforward. But with that said, that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Timbren Rear Suspension Enhancement on our 2021 Ford F-250.